Hello, everyone. Anita, Sandra, and I are returning to the developing domain of the constellation today. And this video focuses on TED 2220, which is the third foundations course. What we'd like to do today is just walk through the syllabus a little bit, talk about how the constellation is infused within the syllabus, and continue to think about what might be missing and places for improvement. So I'd like to share my screen. So on the right of the screen, you'll see that the 4 domains of the constellation. And as I mentioned, we're going to be focused on the developing domain because this is one of the foundations courses. We made this smart art to show kind of how we wanted to roll out these ideas over the course of the next couple of years. This is summer of 2022. So we're not necessarily on this timeline, but important work has been happening as we take our time. So for us, the question isn't necessarily, especially for TED, are you examining the relationships of culture, identity, and power in your foundations courses, but more about how are you doing that? And so that's what I'd like to talk about today. So when we restructured TED 2220 from SED 5010, we wanted to make sure that we chose a variety of resources that leaned on and focused on intersecting oppressions, as well as possibilities and strategies for resistance. So not focusing on the sad story only, but on possibility, reimagining, recreating, and how students and teachers, children and adults and families resist oppressive structures and systems. So one of the first changes was to require this textbook by Baglieri and Lalvani. This is a textbook that's often used with teachers. The content is really accessible and there are opportunities within the book to practice and apply the concepts. And then here are a variety of resources that the instructors can choose from, and in the form of film, podcasts, readings. So it's definitely multimodal. When we look to the developing domain and consider the first aspect, structural inequities, in this course, students learn about how youth with disabilities may also experience additional intersecting oppressions, such as racism, sexism, misogynoir, trans, homophobia, linguicism, and how these are our most marginalized students in schools. We discuss overrepresentation in special education and in segregated settings, and how multiply marginalized youth are more likely to be overrepresented in those spaces. We also talk about underrepresentation in high test scores and grades, meaningful post-secondary experiences like college and employment, volunteer experiences, travel. And then these topics connect to the second layer, codes and strategies of power. So for codes and strategies of power, this problematizes the ways in which education is a medicalized gatekeeping structure for disabled youth. This concept connects to double consciousness, as students with disabilities are often kept out of general education classrooms and schools. We discuss center-based programs. In Michigan, they're called center-based programs versus segregated schools or institutions, and how students are ranked and rated and placed based on how adults perceive their competence, as well as their levels of independence. As you know, in Western culture, independence is deemed quite high. If we consider double consciousness, that's that idea of dependent versus independent versus interdependent. So students are introduced to these ideas by disabled activists of color and community scholars. The class also focuses on seeing students through an asset and strengths-based lens. Ideas like presuming competence and least dangerous assumption are discussed, and students have to apply these concepts through activities. I actually noticed when I was going through the syllabus that these concepts are not directly discussed in the course outline, tentative course schedule right now. And so we want to make sure that they're in there. What we're trying to do is complicate that dominant narrative of individualism and independence, which is a major focus for youth with disabilities. It's often used as a ticket for a youth to move from a more segregated setting to a least segregated setting. The idea of assimilationist and segregationist, this touches on the ways in which disabled people are asked to assimilate or mask because of deficit ideologies of disability. It connects with lack of access, but it also connects to the ways in which we might self-segregate for self or group preservation. We also explore these ideas through the readings that are focused on intersecting oppressions, possibilities, and strategies for resistance. Marginalization is emphasized throughout the course, but once again, not just as a sad story, but we're looking at possibility, change, advocacy. The idea of colonization, particularly authority over student, is harmful, and it's harmful in a context of adult with or without disability over a student with disabilities. So here we position student voice, perspectives, and experiences as important and more important than adults. We also examine belonging, membership, and relationships in the classroom. Hegemony is an idea for this course that's explored through problematizing imposing will of the educator on students. So we connect this idea to humanizing approaches to teaching by integrating culturally responsive and sustaining pedagogy, UDL, SEL, anti-racist teaching, anti-ableist teaching. For us, privilege, the idea of privilege here pushes back on the idea of positivism as the one way, the only way of knowing, by once again grounding in the experiences and stories of disabled people of color who may also be immigrants, who may also experience houselessness, or multilingual, and expands considering youth with disabilities, that notion of multilingual, to consider youth who are non-speaking, who use AAC, augmentative and alternative communication devices, who use sign language, and other various forms of communication. For when I was thinking about isms, the point for us here is really just that we wanted to take a more intersectional lens and make sure that it was threaded throughout the course. Some other ideas and components of the developing domain. So cultural and linguistic erasure here. I think that we could talk more about expanding the notion of what is multilingualism and what does that look like for various modes of communication. There are also ways in which culture and disability relate that I have not unearthed in our syllabus yet. And so I left a note here to come back to that. Withholding an unequal distribution of resources. So this connects to, for us, we're exploring this through the ideas of normalcy and challenging normalcy. These topics are discussed in the course through various films and some supplementary chapters. Disability is a natural part of life. It's a necessary aspect of diversity, and that's emphasized throughout the course. This course doesn't necessarily, as it is written now, touch on land theft and gentrification. Specifically, this may come up in some of the stories from disabled activists and community scholars of color. But I also left that as a note to go back to. We're definitely talking about various disabilities and how those, various identities and how those intersect. Tokenism, I'm not sure if that will come up in this course as written. I left that also as a note. And then finally, time. In this course, will be explored through the notions of crypt time, which will come up in some of the supplementary readings that are posted here at the top. So I think that's all I wanted to discuss today. I don't want the video to be too long, just kind of an exploration of the course, how we're applying these ideas from the constellation. I do want to mention that all of the assignments have multiple means of expression integrated here. I think my computer is freezing, so I'm going to pause for a second so I can find the place. Okay, I found one example here in week 11. It says using any media and or format, synthesize the legislative, historical, and sociological relationships between disability rights, civil rights, and educational equity. And what I wanted to add to that is when I write up my assignments, I say that the product can be compiled in any manner that you like. And so this touches on that multiple means of representation. You can make a website, a graphic organizer, teaching material, a traditional paper, a PowerPoint or Prezi, a Google slideshow, a video or movie, a resource or tool to share with colleagues, parents, or students, a podcast, poster, and illustration. And that's, so that would be elaborated on within the assignment guidelines and rubric, and then stated briefly here in the syllabus. So I think that's all we wanted to share. There are gaps, as I mentioned, and things that I wanted to note and come back to see if they're there. I also think that those gaps are ways to move forward. Even noticing this part here about the disability rights and civil rights movement makes me immediately think of disability justice. And so making that explicit to students, how disability rights is different from disability justice, and how many of the disabled activists and community scholars of color and disabled folks of color who we are turning to and learning from come from a disability justice lens will be important in this course. So thanks for listening. Take care.